We are live. I am Matt Parmley. I am one of the organizers for Kaiju Masterclass. I'm also co-host of the Kaiju Transmissions podcast, along with my host Kyle Bird. And with me today are Mr. Kevin Derendorf and Stan Hyde. We're going to be talking about the Expo 70 panel. Stan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, in terms of fandom, I've been involved in fandom forever, and I've helped put on G-Fest for like 27 years. But I also have a professional connection to film. I'm chief examiner for what's called International Baccalaureate Film, which is a program for high school students, and I've worked on that for 20 years. At this point, I to write programs and look at how we're examining kids and help them make movies. And then besides that, I also do some writing. Plug John LeMay's The Lost Films 3 just came out. I've just started. It's a 3-part article on the War of the Worlds, unmade versions of the War of the Worlds. And do writing on model kits, probably best known for doing panels on how to build and how to paint model kits at conventions, and written for Amazing Figure Modeler and stuff like that about toys and things. But professionally, it's actually film educator. Okay?
Thanks, Stan. Kevin?
Hey, I'm Kevin Derendorf. I wrote a book called Kaiju for Hipsters, and I run a blog called Mazer Patrol, and I frequently show up on Matt's podcast to harass him about various things.
So we're going to talk about the Expo 70. I have a PowerPoint I'm going to share. So there's a lot of really unique things about the Expo itself. So let's first talk about what the Expo is. Basically, the Expo started out of this French tradition of having national exhibitions. So what they would do is they would have this exhibition with manufacturing, industrial, and technological achievements. And from that, it kind of grew and took off. And from 1844, 6 years later, in 1851, there was what's called the Great Exhibition. And that was held in London, England, and multiple countries would come together and they would all share kind of what they had achieved at that point. And so think of it like a very glorified trade show. You kind of bring what you can sell, you bring the thing that you're most proud of, and then you get to gloat about it. People get to learn about it. You get to exchange things like culture and different practices. And one of the cool things about the World's Fair are all these different and very unique achievements, like the first Ferris wheel that came out of Chicago. The Eiffel Tower was actually built in conjunction with the World's Fair. In addition to that, TV, I believe it was 1949, came out of the World's Fair in New York. So what would happen is people didn't believe that TV was a thing. And so they would film the person and then they would have the TV sitting over here and they would actually show them, hey, you're on TV. And then they gave them the card to actually have them show as like proof that they were there. In addition, before Expo 70, you have all these different things that were kind of coming together. So you flash forward from the 1800s to 1970, and in the 60s, you had the Cold War. So you have the Cuban Missile Crisis, you have Vietnam, you have a bunch of movies coming out about space exploration. So like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and these things are kind of culminating in the 1970 World Expo. And you can see from this picture in 1964, it's the Expo became more internationally flavored. So you have all the different flags, and you have the focus being on the world coming together, which is really interesting when you set it against the backdrop of the Cold War and all these different conflicts. And so that brings us to 1970, and we're going to talk about Expo 70. And if you look at the front, that front building with the little canopy, that's actually the U.S. Pavilion. And in the back, you're actually going to see the Soviet Union Pavilion. And so you have these two world powers in conflict, and yet everybody's sort of coming together. And that's kind of the theme of Expo 70. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to pivot. I'm going to go to Stan. We're going to kind of talk about his experience because he was there in the flesh.
Yeah, so I was 13 years old, and for whatever reason, the local high school decided, oh, maybe we should have a trip to Japan. And so for what seems a ridiculous amount of money now, I think it was $600 for Canadian bucks for 3 weeks in Japan, 2 weeks in Tokyo, and a week at Osaka. And so I was there as a kid, and just looking back at that overhead view of Expo, one of the amazing things about it was the kind of contrast, because that's Japan in the Showa era. So, as kids, we would be walking down these streets, which, it's some places in Tokyo, probably they're probably gone now, but at that time they'd probably been like that for 200 years. You go into a candy store, there'd be little wooden floors, and stuff, and it was basically the bottom floor of somebody's house. And at the same time, you're at Expo, and it's this glorious experience of futurism, so they've got the moon rock in the American pavilion. I stood in line to see the moon rock. That was like, wow, I've got to see that. I didn't get into the Russian pavilion, but the Russian pavilion was definitely one of the problems. As usual, there's these long lineups, right, for everything. So even at, being there for 3 days, it's difficult to get in to see everything that was there. But I mean, for a 13-year-old, it was kind of this wonderful sci-fi kind of experience of being, surrounded by all this future technology. And I have to say, as impressive as the national pavilions were, because it's Japan, the corporations and their pavilions had some of the most astonishing stuff in them in terms of what you could see inside. So and I can't remember necessarily all the companies for all of them, but I know, there was one where there was a film that was on the floor in the wall, so the film sort of surrounded you, and it was all based on the Spanish artist Juan Miró. And this is it for a 13-year-old kid. This is what introduced me to art as well as science. It was like, holy crap, there's all this stuff, and I had no idea people painted like that, or they built things like that, or they did these sculptures. And so it was, it changed my life almost as much as maybe King Kong versus Godzilla did. So should I just discuss the Mitsubishi one, since I kind of got there? So one of the things that was a standout, and which I actually went to see 3 times, was the Mitsubishi Future Pavilion. And what's interesting about that was though it's a Mitsubishi's company, it was Tomoyuki Tanaka and Toho and Eiji Tsuburaya had a big part in what was on inside there. And I think I knew that because I was getting the Japanese Fantasy Film Journal. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure when I went to see it, I actually had some idea that Tsuburaya had been a part of it. And I'm just wondering if possibly it was Japanese Fantasy Film Journal that I knew that from. But you knew instantly when you were inside because of Ifukube's music. And later on, apparently, some of the cues for this were used in Godzilla versus Gigan. But I mean, it was like basically what happened to you inside. If you look at this top picture, that one. There's this thing called the Travator, which was a moving walkway. And so you stood on this thing, and the first part was called The Nature of Japan, and it took you through a tsunami, and it took you through a volcano. And I remember thinking at the time, I wonder if this tsunami, if some of these shots were from Godzilla, Mothra versus Godzilla, because it was very similar to that opening with the storm. Basically, they had these huge screens that they projected things. And as I recall, they had mirrors. So you see how it looks like you're really high up in the air in that picture. You're not really, but there's this increased illusion of depth that's made by putting mirrors down there and reflecting what's going on in the screens, so that you seem to be surrounded by, and I mean, they were effects work that was done. Some of the work was done at Toho. Some of the stuff was done by Tsuburaya. Now, of course, this is right when he passed away. He passed away in January of 1970. So, and this is information from August Fragone's book. Apparently, he was there for a shoot in November, and he was there working on material in December, but then he passed away on January 25th. So the job was taken over by Mr. Bano of Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. And I was lucky enough to have supper with him one time when he was a guest at G-Fest, and he was very excited to find out that as a kid I'd been there and that I still remembered it and still thought it was super cool. He was an interesting guy. He's very concerned. I think this was a job that he would really have enjoyed because he was really seriously concerned about the environment. That night, when we were talking, I mean, you can feel that from Godzilla versus the Smog Monster, but he was talking about Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring, and how he felt like that was a daring thing to do. Maybe somebody would murder her because she was taking on these chemical companies that were, producing pesticides at the time. So he was a guy who really felt strongly about these things, and I suspect this was a kind of a cool job for him. Also, he was a guy who really seemed to love film music and stuff, and Ifukube and things like that. It had been a very memorable experience for him. So, anyways, the two areas that I remember the most of that are the volcano and the tsunami, because that was like you were immersed. As you went further through it, there was a place where they had smoke and they projected images of fish and sharks on the smoke. So it was like you were going underwater, and there was sort of there was an underwater city, and then there was a future city at the base of Mount Fuji. But I have to be honest, I mean, this was all 50 years ago. So I have a mental picture still of going through the volcano and going through the tsunami. But I must admit, I can't really sum it up a firsthand picture. Maybe if I saw a photo of the future city by Mount Fuji, I would be able to. But at this point, those are the things that stuck with me. But it was like being in a Toho special effects movie to a degree. So it was pretty cool. Hence, going back 3 times. So, and at that time, I was a Godzilla fan already. So
no, that sounds amazing. One of the things about the expo that I really love is the theme of it being the progress and in harmony for mankind. And like I said earlier, I think when you have all these different countries that are technically basically at war with each other, and you're smack dab in the Cold War, and then you have this. And one of the things that's really great is by allowing people to come together and to experience the things that you experience there. I think it can be a wonderful way to kind of learn from each other. Kevin, I'm going to pivot to you real quick, and we're going to talk about the Tower of the Sun.
Sure. I actually had a question for Stan first. I was just kind of wondering, how multilingual was it there? Was everything in several languages, or was it all Japanese? Or
no, it was all in several languages. In general, be careful here, because I'm not necessarily noticing what's not in English. But in terms of everybody who was a host at the fair, they had no problems with English. Obviously we were a Canadian group most of the time, although we got to go off on our own. But there was no problem with it. I mean, even in 1970, Japan was a pretty easy place to get around. A lot of people knew English, but the fair itself, everything was translated easily. And, as a group, in a lot of places, when we went to the Tower of the Sun, there would be hostesses that came, because we were a group of Canadian kids and stuff. And we got kind of showed off as go to the Canadian Pavilion, go to the British Columbia Pavilion. My home province had a pavilion there too. So it's like, oh, here's the kids from home, let's show them around. So it was kind of fun that way. But yeah, it was easy.
Hey Stan, did you get to go see the IMAX film? Because I know Expo 70 was actually the first ever IMAX film. It was Tiger Child, and that would have been in the Fuji Group Pavilion.
I think I'm pretty sure I did. I'm trying to sum it up. Sometimes it's hard in terms of summing up memories. And also there were so many film presentations in terms of, film that surrounded you. I remember there was one where you stood in the middle and the film was on all sides and stuff like that as well. So I'm not necessarily, again, if I saw a picture, I might specifically remember it. I have the vaguest feeling, yes, I did, but I'm not going to say I did. One quick thing I just wanted to say. One of the things about this pavilion and the way it's designed that I thought was really neat in terms of the designers is their concept was this was going to be more a festival than just an exposition. And it was a place where people from all around the world could meet. So you have these open spaces where people could kind of pool around and stuff. And it's the very Japanese sort of, idea of a summer festival kind of thing, where everybody's coming out to the temple or whatever. Anyways,
that's great. Kevin, you want to talk about Tower of the Sun?
Sure. So if there's one iconic image from the 70 Expo, it's definitely this weirdly shaped tower that's called the Tower of the Sun, and it's still around even though most of the Expo stuff is gone now. And you can see it here. It's an interesting shape in that it's got sort of the main spire in the middle, and then it has two sort of shapes that go off to the side. And at the time, you could enter from the bottom, and also on this mezzanine that went all around it. There were entrances on either the two sort of wings that were off to either side of it. And actually, the way that it got its name is from the author Sakio Komatsu, who wrote Japan Sinks and other things. He was involved with the expo, and he saw the design for the tower and thought that the the way that the tower was sort of piercing through the mezzanine at the top was suggestive to him. So he brought up the novel Season of the Sun by Shintaro Ishihara, and basically the designer of the tower, Taro Okamoto, thought, okay, well that's a neat idea. Let's call it the Tower of the Sun to sort of reflect that. But it works out as well because the top of the tower, we have this face that is very sun-like, and the idea is that the design of the tower, it has sort of these three main faces on it. So you have the one that's in the middle that we saw in that photo there, and that's the one that looks towards the present, and then there's the one that looks towards the future that's on the very top with big glowing eyes and a golden face, and then on the back there's a face that looks towards the past, along with these like crackly red thunder things. There used to be a fourth face, actually. This is gone now, but if you went down underneath the tower, there's this fourth face that was in the underworld, and it was really cool the way they did it, because they projected lights onto this thing here, so that it made different expressions depending on the lights that were projected onto it. It's kind of unfortunate that that's all gone, because that would have been a really neat thing to see.
It just suddenly strikes me, it looks a bit like something from Neon Genesis Evangelion, but anyways.
Yeah. I see a little bit of that. Is that sort of abstract look that I could see, and that's a show that's very into Showa culture.
Yeah.
So.
Having some issues with the PowerPoint, for which I apologize. So I'm kind of dinking around with it back here in the background. Let's talk about Taro Okamoto, who he's here in the picture. He's on the set of Warning from Space, and from what I understand, that actually is one of Kubrick's inspiration, sort of, for 2001: Space Odyssey. And also in the picture, that's actually from the museum, The Artist Explosion. So Okamoto is actually the guy that designed Tower of the Sun, along with several other things. But you can kind of get an idea of how eccentric his art really was, with all these different and very unique shapes. And then here is actually what's called the Myth of Tomorrow. So really interesting history. He was called upon by a hotel in Mexico to design this mural. And what it's depicting is actually an atomic explosion that goes off, and in the middle you can see someone in the skeleton. And the hotel that was paying for this actually went belly up, and then the mural was lost. And then in the early 2000s, actually, it was found again, and so they brought it and they put it in Shibuya, and I think it's still there today. But he's the one who designed the Tower of the Sun, and you can kind of get a sense for just very abstract and unique and weird art.
Can I jump back to that comment about Kubrick for just a sec?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that in John Butler's biography of Kubrick, it talks about the fact that not just Warning from Space, but apparently other, he says kaiju, but if at that time he's probably talking about things like the Mysterians and Battle in Outer Space, and that Kubrick was really inspired to do science fiction from that, and particularly the starfish guys that stuck in his mind. He didn't know the title of the film, but the Okamoto's design for the aliens, which sort of moved like dancers in their starfish suit. Oh yeah, we should say. I'm still waiting for my copy. Yeah, but it's on the way. That Arrow Video has just released finally a good copy. I remember watching this movie on a black and white tiny TV in my grandmother's house, like in the 60s. But Kubrick, I think it's important sometimes in film history. Sometimes we don't know how big a contribution those space films made. I think they were hugely influential, not just to Kubrick, but to George Lucas too, because as much as George Pell also went down the route, those movies like Battle in Outer Space and The Mysterians basically proved that you could do this big space opera battle thing with models and the technology that ultimately was a Star Wars technology. I mean, now it's CGI, but it's been reworked so many times. So, and Kubrick also, I think, the idea they were dancers. At one point, he was thinking of doing his aliens as ballerinas in suits with spots, so that the bodies would drop out and the spots would swirl around. So, I mean, literally, it was part of his imagination in terms of, when he was thinking about 2001.
That's wonderful. So this display, The Mystery of Life, is actually completely and totally underground. And did you have a chance to see this, Stan?
Yeah, we went through the whole thing, and we were taken through it by lovely hostess. I remember the hostess. I remember the Grade 8 guys being smitten with her, actually, and she was really tolerant with it too, and kind of encouraged it a little bit. I think she was sweet, but again, so we went all up, and for me, of course, the thing that sticks in my mind the most is the dinosaurs and the evolution, because I was a dino fan, and as you went up the Tower of the Sun, there were all it was life evolving, right? So we went through the whole thing. My most clear memories are the memories of the dinosaurs and stuff, and then being up on top above the plaza.
I'm actually going to go to the Tree of Life because I think
there we go. Yeah.
So these are creatures that were designed by Tsuburaya Production, and it's like 45 meters tall. So you get a sense of how big the scale is for these things. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, the overall tower was 70 meters tall, so they managed to fit this entire 45-meter thing inside as a display piece, and then you kind of went up escalators, right?
Yeah, you went up escalators. Yeah, with warnings. There was another section you went through with warnings. Don't look too much at the top of the escalator because you might faint. Some people have been fainting because big escalators and stuff. But yeah, this was amazing. This is burned in my memory because it's dinosaurs. It's prehistoric animals. It's like so bright. I mean, his colors, primary colors and stuff.
It's really wild.
Yeah.
So Kevin, I have you talk about Explora.
Yeah, so this is just sort of one of the examples of how the expo was part of pop culture, and then also kaiju were that the god of manga, this guy named Osamu Tezuka, who's the most famous person working in the field, did this creature for Shonen magazine that's called Expora, and the idea is that this is just all of the different pavilions are conglomerated together into this giant monster form. So we've got, obviously the Tower of the Sun is the head, but you can look around and see, where the Australian pavilion is, or the Mitsubishi Pavilion, and the France Pavilion, etc. And like each little piece comes together, and there's a couple of different diagrams that kind of like break it down. But I thought that was neat. That was just sort of a magazine thing that they did as a stunt around the time for promotion.
We've been talking about the expo itself, but we're here to talk about the giant monsters. And so probably the most infamous of that would be Gamera vs. Jiger, which was shot and filmed on set at the expo, released basically a week after the expo opened. And as you can see, there's a little line here that says, "Gamera, don't let her ruin the expo site." So the plot of the film actually revolves around the idea that this monster has been awakened, has been drawn to Osaka, and then Gamera has to basically defend the expo from the attack from Jiger. We have some behind-the-scenes footage, and I'll just kind of flip through this. One of the facts about this film that I found pretty interesting is that apparently they wanted to destroy some more pavilions in the film, and they were basically told they couldn't do that, which in some respects makes sense, but in others kind of disappoints me because I think that could have been quite a lot of fun.
I've heard that's a big cultural difference that, in the States, it's kind of taken as like a great honor to have your building destroyed in an action movie or something that is good for publicity, but in Japan, especially at that time, it was a little looked down upon in terms of maybe this is bad luck.
I was going to point out in the last slide, I don't know, Matt, if you can get back to it. These two are bromides that I got when I was there in 1970, and you can see that Nori, I'm not going to be able to. Mr. Yuasa, the director of the film, has actually autographed this one. It's a little golden thing on the side. But the next slide is the model set from the movie, and it's pretty amazing, really.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. These, I don't know should I talk about the bromides at all now? I mean, they basically what you could do. It's weird. Like I'm one of the few people who goes to Japan, and I'm nostalgic for Showa. 1970s era Japan, because we did spend so much time in places that aren't really there anymore. So there was this little candy store not far from where we were put up in the Olympic site. And what you did when you went inside, basically the kids were going there to buy fireworks because they were having a fight with a Japanese volleyball team on the other side. They were exploding things at each other. So I would walk there we were Canada's Badwill ambassadors. There were these rocket things you could shoot off and they blew up. The volleyball teams and us, basically we set a fire to the thing at one point. But anyways, that's another story for another time. But in this same place, these were like collecting baseball cards or something. You paid 5 yen and there was a little book and it was full of paper envelopes, and you tore the paper envelope and you got what is essentially a postcard, a bromide, which had pictures from Ultraman, X from Outer Space, which I'd never seen before, Gamera, and Godzilla. And so I didn't have much money, but the yen was only worth a third of the cent at that time. So it was, so I was able to go and buy a lot of these and have them with me. So I think of them as monster postcards, but I also think of just going into that candy shop and that very tolerant older Japanese man, with a crazy kaiju kid who, you have more pictures. So.
Yeah, here's some additional behind the scenes. There's not a ton of stuff as far as the movie production history that are available in English. I do know, here's some additional pictures of the pavilion. You have the Tower of the Sun in the background. It's a really unique movie, though. It's hard for me to imagine an American movie that's produced solely to cash in with a festival. I just can't wrap my head around that, and that's a pretty interesting concept.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the things about how important this was for Japan and its view of itself at the time, sort of like the Olympics. It was a big group participation. Here's Japan coming into the modern world, kind of after World War II. But, yeah. So,
of course, there's the Godzilla versus Gamera stage show. So there's actually a clip, and I don't know where the clip originated. It was found on Twitter. It's about 2.5 seconds long, so I'm going to play it. It's going to play a couple times so that everybody can get a chance to kind of take it in. But this is actually a clip of the stage show with Haruo Nakajima in the Godzilla suit. That's pretty cool. I wish there was more footage of that. There's some additional pictures. So let me get back to those real quick, and we can kind of talk about the stage show in a bit more detail. So, Kevin, I'm going to pivot to you and have you kind of lead the Godzilla stage show discussion.
Sure. So this was kind of a big deal when you think about even today. We still don't have a whole lot in the way of official crossovers between Gamera and Godzilla as franchises, and this was sort of at the peak of both of their popularities. And they managed to get this the show together with a fairly wide assortment of monsters, because you had Gamera and Jiger and Godzilla, but you also got Gorosaurus and Minera and Space Gauss. So you got a good set of creatures on stage together. As you mentioned, Haruo Nakajima was in the costume, and originally the plan was that they were going to do 3 performances a day. And that is too much if you know anything about what suit acting is like, and what an awful vocation that is. And also that Nakajima was this close to retirement anyway. He was just nah, I'm going to do 1 a day. So because of that, it was definitely cut back to 1 show a day. And some people were able to go and have some memories of it, but it doesn't seem like it was filmed officially. So all we have is a little bit of Super 8 footage and a couple of Polaroids from people who happened to be there at the time and able to sort of sneak some photos. It was hosted by Konomura. So on top of, Nakajima being in the suit, we had, I guess Americans would know him as Corn Job, right? But but yeah, he was kind of the MC running things there. And he was also in the Gamera versus Jiger movie, so it's all very it all loops back together, right?
Stan, did you get to see this one?
Oh, sigh. No, that's the problem. When you're a grade 8 and you're at the mercy of the chaperone saying, now you'll do this, now you do that. No idea. So yeah, sigh. I need a time machine. Wish I had.
So these are the Sonorama.
Yeah. So again, when I was there as a kid, I didn't know Japanese, but I knew enough to recognize Godzilla in Japanese characters on the side of a book. So while my friends were buying fireworks and blowing things up and frightening Japanese couples with explosives, I was in bookstores digging through looking for books. And one of the things I discovered were these Sonorama books. They're not all Sonorama. That's actually a specific company, but the bottom line is there are these cardboard books. Inside they have a vinyl record. The vinyl record usually has excerpts from the movie. It maybe have some sound effect tests. It has some music, and there's illustrations. So it's the first place where I got introduced to kaiju anatomy, because these images are from those books. These were on paper. These are Dr. O, if you guys know, who did design these. He worked for Tsuburaya, and he would sketch out on notepads what the monster insides were and what they did, and then they'd be given to artists to actually illustrate the final versions and stuff. So he's kind of a fascinating story. He died very young from a heart attack, but was very involved in the bringing of science fiction and things like Star Trek to Japan too. And then the artwork in the Sonorama books themselves. So these are all things I collected when I was in Japan. I see my scans, or I can tell my scans because I've done some little photo tweaks. So I see my scans all the time online because that's where I blurred out that thing. So the amazing thing was when I was there, I knew Gappa. I'd seen Monster from a Prehistoric Planet. I had never seen Ultraman. I might have had some vague idea about Ultraman, but Ultraman was amazing to discover, and Gamera I had very little knowledge of. So I was making all these kaiju discoveries as a kid, and the other amazing thing, there's that picture that was a few back of King Kong fighting King Ghidorah. The amazing thing about these books is it's like, I don't know if you guys are like comic book fans and like, the DC universe when they used to have Earth 1 and Earth 2 and everything like that, but this was like all of a sudden there were these books, and Ultraman would be fighting Godzilla, and King Kong is fighting King Ghidorah, and there would be characters crossing over from one universe to another universe, essentially, and there would be all these things that had never happened. And this was like mind-numbing. It's like, oh my God, is there a movie where King Kong versus, King Ghidorah? So if I was a beginning kaiju fan at that time, and I probably 13. Now I've been a kaiju fan for a while. This was the thing that set the hook, because it was like this art. The art's amazing, and it was, the Kaiju Big Bang. So it was like, I wished, as an adult, I've been able to go to movies in Japan and see Godzilla films. I wish at that time, I've been able to have the moxie to go, okay, I'm going to find a movie theater. I believe King Kong versus Godzilla was in re-release as one of the festival films at that time. I think I saw a poster somewhere when we were there. I have memories of seeing one. But anyways, the artwork's amazing. So it made me a lifelong collector of this stuff. And it was just, it was fantastic. I mean, travel's great anytime. Anytime you get a chance to sort of broaden yourself out, but especially when you're 13 years old, and it sort of opens up this whole science and like I said before, being surrounded by the future at Expo too. So you really get into a mode of imagining the future as a possibility and what might happen. And, so it was a great trip.
So these are some Tower of the Sun figures. Kevin's kind of put together a nice list of adjacent references from basically multiple appearances from the Tower of the Sun. Here's some action figures from Bandai, and then I'll let Kevin take the reins on the next couple slides.
This was a manga. I am forgetting the author's name right now. That was contemporary, basically, but it was basically Expo Daikaiju. So the idea behind this was that there is that there were monsters that attacked the expo, and then all of the various pavilions all formed into different sorts of anti-kaiju weapons to fight back against them. So this was a vintage manga. So if you happen to track it down, this is from the anime series Compiler, which is based on a manga by Kiya Asamiya, who I guess would be known for Steam Detectives and Batman Child of Dreams and things like that. There's a giant Tower of the Sun robot that faces off against a couple of other giant robot things, including famous athletes. I don't know anything about baseball, so I don't remember this name, but it's pretty goofy. 20th Century Boys is a huge manga franchise by Naoki Urasawa, and there's a sequence where the one enemy is attacking with this giant robot, and the other enemy comes in with a Tower of the Sun robot. The idea behind this is that 20th Century Boys, the entire premise is that it is kids that grew up in the 60s and 70s and were highly influenced by that pop culture are now adults and kind of making world changes based on that. So, you know, your main villain guy, he has this sort of stormtroopers all dressed like the Science Patrol and Ultraman and things like that. So it's a lot of that sort of pop culture of the time. So of course he builds his giant robot to look like the Tower of the Sun. Toho adapted these mangas into a trilogy of movies. It was the most expensive movie production, actually. And as a promotion, they altered the actual Tower of the Sun to look like the one from the robot from the manga for a period for the promotion. So you can kind of see in this picture here, this is the actual Tower of the Sun that's docked up to look like the robot from the manga as their publicity.
That's awesome.
That's pretty sweet.
The manga series Kaiju by Shingo Honda. It's a great thing with lots of really creepy monsters attacking Japan, and it's very brutal survival horror manga. It's all available on Kindle right now. But one of the plot points that comes along later is that various things around Japan are actually built as anti-monster weaponry, including the Tower of the Sun. So the Tower of the Sun turns into this anti-kaiju monster weapon thing and sort of fights against another creature in one of the later volumes.
That's just an explosion from Naruto, I believe.
Yeah, so there's a character Deidara in Naruto that all of the attacks are based on Okamoto design type of stuff. Wow. So the final attack is, of course, this giant explosion, which happens to be in the shape of the Tower of the Sun. This one, I think, is the one that most people are going to be familiar with, and it goes actually way back before the Expo, but it just kind of shows how much the Expo was on people's minds. If you look at the monster prints, the whole idea in that episode is that they are going to capture Gomora and display him at the Expo.
Right.
Yep.
Another piece of great nostalgia is this Crayon Shinchan movie, the Adult Empire Strikes Back, and this is basically a movie kind of about like the exasperated parents on Wii and them trying to recapture their youth. But the beginning of the movie actually starts out with them going to this sort of like recreation of the 70 Expo, and you can kind of see the tower pretty prominently. But then the Expo gets attacked by a giant kaiju, and the dad has to turn into a giant ultra hero, and it's a lot of fun. This is a fantastic movie, by the way. It was like ranked number 4 all-time anime movies by one of the Japanese things, so it's kind of shame it didn't get released here. The original Kamen Rider from 1971, the 7th episode was filmed at the Expo also, so you can kind of get a backdrop as he's fighting this chameleon man with his karate, and you get a nice look at sort of the background if you don't want to just watch it in vanilla documentary form. So we mentioned Gomora before as being connected to the Expo, and the Ultra Kaiju Humanization Project and Kaiju Girls both kind of like make sly references to that here and there. In the 5th volume, which has sadly not ever been released in English, Gomora finally makes it to the Expo, and you see the Tower of the Sun itself looks like a giant Ultraman, and it's very traumatic.
It's all come through full circle.
And then,
Yeah, so I said I would talk briefly about this. I mean, going back to the idea that there was so much influence on people from the Expo and the whole idea of futurism and imagining what things might be like, especially Japanese corporation pavilions. And so this is the Landmark Pavilion. And I guess in 1972, when Doug Trumbull was making Silent Running, where they needed these giant spaceships to carry all of Earth's forests and all Earth's remaining vegetation, essentially. Earth is just, I guess, a giant paved city in the future. They needed a concept for these ships that were like the conservation ships. So they took the landmark tower that had these pods that you went up to, and you could see, the presentation inside the pods, and turned them on their sides, and then added, instead of the pods, although inside the ships there are storage containers that look suspiciously like those pods too. These big domes with the forests inside, and they became the Valley Forge and the Exeter and whatever the third ship is. I think those are the right. Valley Forge is the main one. So we talked about Kubrick being influenced by Okamoto, but then also I think that there's so many different pop culture things and science fiction kind of vectors, visions that kind of got birthed there. 20th Century Boys, by the way, I really want to plug because it's awesome. So check it out if you haven't checked out the manga or the movies.
So Stan, you went in 1970, but you also got to visit the Expo 70 commemorative park. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So my poor wife puts up with all kinds of things. So this was like we're visiting in March, and it was. Japan in March is usually pretty good, and the quite often there's some cherry blossoms or at least plum blossoms out right there at Expo Park that you can see in that picture. And there were some on that day, but essentially now at Expo Park, the Tower of the Sun is there, and there's a little sort of place that's selling memorabilia and stuff underneath it, but the rest of the park is just a park with some gardens and things, and there are plaques that show you where the various pavilions are. So I'm almost crying because this is a big part of my life. This is a big memory. This is like the first time I ever traveled anywhere, and it's like all kinds of things. But the bottom line is I'm looking at plaques and going, this is where the BC pavilion was, and my wife is freezing to death. It is really cold. I think we saw snow on the Shinkansen when we were on the way up. I don't think there was snow in the park, but she's totally freezing. So I'm going every 5 minutes, and I'm buying hot coffee from the vending machine, not because she drinks coffee, but because she can hold the hot coffee for long enough that she can warm up and then pass it to me, and I'll drink the coffee. I think I drank 5 things of coffee, So we finally had to pull the plug and go, okay, I'm sorry, and we'll go home. So, in that sense, I don't know if I would recommend a visit to Expo Park or not. There are events that are held, there are events that are held there, and the Tower of the Sun's there, which is an amazing thing to see. Although I know I've seen it a couple times in transit from like Osaka Airport to Kyoto. So it's got to be right on a highway somewhere. It's like typical again, like my poor wife. Look, it's the Tower of the Sun. What? I mean, where? And what are you talking about? But anyways, she's darling, but she puts up with a lot. So it is. There was also an amusement park that was there, and I think it was there until the 90s. I think it was there about 20 years with roller coasters and stuff like that. But essentially, it just wore down and wore down. I'm trying to think. I don't think it's easy in terms of being in Osaka to get to Expo Park. You take a train from Shin Osaka, and I mean, it's not like you're downtown or something like that. So I think essentially part of it is the remoteness of it. It's not like so many people used to visit except for the amusement park. So eventually that was torn down. So, I would say it's still cool. I mean, I think Okamoto's art, to be there in the presence of any artwork, is awesome. And in looking at what Kevin had put together, there's so many infinite ways you can project onto that tower. I mean, I just think it's an amazing piece of art. Right, so I would recommend, if you get a chance, you might want to go there, but you don't have to probably block in more than 20 minutes unless you were there like me and you really want to look at the plaques and go, oh, this is where I was, and try to locate where you were at the time. So
pretty amazing to think about how an event from 1970 has a lot of different pop culture references throughout various different mediums. And actually, in 2025, the Expo is going to be returning to Osaka with a theme of designing future society of our lives. And the pictures here are actually kind of the design concepts for it. And the interesting thing about that is like it really reminds me of The Sinking of Japan, which recently came out on Netflix. There's a thing at the end that you get to see, and like this looks like it could be the exact same thing. Do you guys have anything to add about the Expo 2025?
I was just going to say, I've already talked my wife into, I think we should go. Like, it's kind of like I don't want to say a bookend. It's not like, the end of my traveling days in 2025, but I definitely am like, oh yeah, that's a good reason to go. And again, to go back to this whole idea that it's not just, we had an exposition here in Vancouver and it was very much focused on, future traveling and, methods of locomotion and stuff like that. It did grow a bit beyond how it was originally conceived, but the fact that it's designing future society for our lives, it's got this bigger futurism kind of projection than some fairs have had. I think that's really neat, so I mean, let's go.
I know one of the big designers that's working on stuff there is Shoji Kawamori. So if you're a big fan of Macross, which I know many people are, or if you're a big fan of Gunhead, which I know many people aren't, I think it's definitely worth going to see what sort of things he cooks up because they're going to be impressive.
Hey, the designs in Gunhead are great. It's just the movie, but yeah, that's awesome.
All right. I think that concludes our Expo 70 panel. Thank you so much for joining Kaiju Masterclass. One quick note, we are selling t-shirts. If you would like to go get those, we have those on Redbubble. You can find links on our website. You can also find them on our social media, Twitter and Facebook. Thank you so much.